been racking my brain all morning to come up with some kind of Jay's been looking after grassland restoration for him for a few years. She told me today it's a lifetime appointment. So, if anybody wants to help her out, she would gladly take that. She's going to give us a defrag. Oh, that's. You're going to teach us how to fix a computer.
More water on. Actually, I'm not wearing my GRF hat for this one. This, I'll wait until I get up there. You got the notes?
I just, hold on, I just got to start this again.
Is it possible to hide that?
This,
Yeah, that's good. Perfect, that's better. Okay. So this is a diary of a project that ACA, it was the second project in the multi-SAR program. It's a piece of, it's a quarter section just north of Writing on Stone that my husband and I acquired about 2013. So as you guys all know, the only way to defragment fragmented landscape is through restoration. So this quarter, it's got prairie on 3 sides. It's just north of Writing on Stone. You can see the main access road down to the river there. It's in the post-glacial meltwater channels of the Milk River Valley, so it's quite interesting. And it's been cultivated. The top is cultivated, the bottom is cultivated. There's a little strip of native prairie in the middle, but it's been, the oldest photo we could find is 1945, but sections of it I'm sure have been cultivated since the 20s or maybe even 1910 kind of time frame. So Bonnie Moffat was a landholder in the early 2000s, and she was a interpreter at Writing on Stone Park, and she was really passionate about wildlife and grasslands, and she approached the multi-SAR team in 2004, and she wanted to replace the existing cultivation with native vegetation similar to the surrounding grasslands. She also wanted to improve wildlife habitat on the property and use those improvements on the property as a means to encourage habitat conservation with the neighbors, other landowners. So multi-SAR got together and formed a team with Bonnie and came up with 4 criteria that met their, criteria for picking a successful project. So there was high potential to link areas between stewardship initiatives, high value as a demonstration site, an opportunity to improve a site, and then close proximity to high multi-species conservation value areas. So with these criteria in mind, a habitat conservation strategy was developed for this quarter. And these objectives for this piece were to regain ecological function associated with dry mixed grass prairie, establish plant communities similar to the adjacent, improve range health, which would be hard on abandoned cultivation, and then to maintain a wildlife travel corridor between the Milk River Valley and the wonderful large tracts of rangeland to the northeast. So this area is in the brown soil zone. As I mentioned, it was part of this active floodplain of the Milk River Valley, and the soils really tell the story. So the north end is more hilly, and it's really coarse, hobbly till. There's also some stringers of till across the property running east-west lower down. There's also some finer textures, Bingville chin on some of the lacustrine and fluvial deposits. And then there's some areas that are thin breaks with only 1 meter to bedrock. So interesting, challenging. And then there's a couple of little glycolic areas where they're poorly drained. So the challenge, this area, it had been abandoned cultivation for at least a few years before Bonnie approached multi-SAR. So the plant community was a charming non-native community of downy brome and prickly lettuce and 35% bare ground. And there were some other players in there too, like Russian thistle and rose beard, dandelion and bindweed and Canada thistle. So a really lovely mix. So some of the restoration issues here, these fields have a history in their seed bank of all the activities that have gone on before farming and then also invasive species. And some of the stuff that would have been farmed, like even sweet clover was seeded at one point in the 50s, kind of live on to haunt you. And also some of the native species still persist after 60 years. Like in the wetland, there's a plant that's really just come off the rare plant list. It's got a huge hard seed, and it's just been surviving with that level of disturbance for decades. So issues there though are topsoil loss, soil crusting. There's a lot of that topsoil is blown away, and there's now quite a clay crust, which is really challenging for infill species to get good soil contact. Invasive species, and then the mystery seed bank. So the Multisar team did a vegetation inventory to characterize the grassland to give an idea of potential species to use to reclaim. They did some soil testing and they came out alkaline, nitrogen deficient, excess calcium, so pretty typical for dry mixed grass in that area anyway. And the surrounding grassland was needle and thread, June grass, blue grama, one of the most common plant communities in the uplands for the dry mixed grass. One thought though is that with these eroded topsoils and a drier site, the potential of it may not be realistic to get back to that kind of adjacent plant community that's still got all its topsoil and subsoil intact, but that was at least gave a perspective and a target. So for site preparation, ACA did year 1 and 2 spring applications of glyphosate to get the downy brome knocked off. And then in year 2, they actually seeded it to triticale and then baled it all and removed it along with a whole whack of other things like Russian thistle that were in those lovely bales. And this sort of prepared the ground for seeding. And in 2010, 4 years later, after this project started, they seeded it. So in 2010, they seeded it was 3 species, sort of roughly equal proportions by weight: needle and thread, western wheatgrass, blue grama. But unfortunately, doing it by weight, if you actually do it by number of seeds, it ended up to be very heavily seeded to blue grama, with not a lot of western wheatgrass and needle and thread. So it was seeded at 600 seeds per meter squared, and it was broadcast and harrowed, and that's a fairly light seeding rate for broadcast seeding. And then unfortunately, none of the needle and thread actually germinated. It was a very expensive bags of seed that absolutely nothing came from. So now you're down to 2 species that have been seeded on this property. And there were some good things about the seed mix, like needle and thread's a good bunch grass. It's mid-cereal, but it'll extend into late cereal. The western wheatgrass is a good rhizomatous species. It's really good on clay soils. And the blue grama is also rhizomatous, but they're quite short. And it's a lower structural layer, and it's also a mixture of cool season grasses and warm season grass. So there were good aspects to this mix as well. And they really got lucky that year. So this is precip between April and September of that year. So the blue lines are precipitation events. The green line is the long-term average accumulated precipitation from April to September, and the red line is how much precip they got that growing season. So they really had horseshoes that year, and it really gave them a good start to this project. So by year 2, you've got the early colonizers, a lot of colonizing forbs that we call scab species. So some people might think of them as weeds, like gumweed and plantain, but they are providing that kind of initial scab to allow the grasses to come up. So most of those ones listed there are native, except for the field fluffweed, which is just a little guy. And we're starting to see some expression of the seed mix. So unfortunately, Bonnie died in November of that year. And no work was done on that property in 2012. And in 2013, Ken and I bought the property from her family. And we actually didn't know that this was an ACA project at the time, but we had similar values and we're quite happy to carry on with it. So in 2014, year 5, we're starting to see good expression of the seed mix, a lot of blue grama, a little bit of western wheatgrass. We still have a signature of those annual brooms, but it's a lot lower. Bare ground's coming down as well. So we're seeing an upward shift in range health. Colonizers are still present. And so we really kicked in with adaptive management, Ken and I. It's really important to, if you want things to keep going on a positive trajectory, that you have to get in there and nudge it in the right direction. Otherwise, these kinds of conversion projects can really derail. And that goes for, you know, smaller projects too in reclamation. So we did a ton of hand pulling, baby's breath, and herbiciding, spot spraying. We would just go off zigzag across the fields with the quad with a, you know, glyphosate on one side and broadleaf herbicide on the other, and just sort of systematically, whatever, without trying to do any kind of broadcast spraying of the entire area. And we still do that, actually, not as intensively as what year 6 there, but it's still required. So this is one of the species that's challenging. It's biennial, so its cover fluctuates from year to year, and the seeds will stay in the soil for over 20 years. So we're not going to get rid of this thing, but it does change site conditions, and those rigid skeletons capture snow, and in the lee of the plant and all that snow is all their seeds. So it just kind of goes on, but the best thing that we found for managing sweet clover is these guys. So we've added grazing into there with the help of one of the neighbors, and they're great for, we've been able to time it for a little while for targeting sweet clover when all the flowers are on, and they just love it. Go for the alfalfa too, and then we've been using them early in the season too to skim graze some of the crested wheatgrass that's along the driveway, because you still have to worry about invasive species on your perimeters. Sometimes this can be challenging though, because the sweet clover comes up every year and you don't want to keep hitting your field at the same time every year. So sometimes we're not winning, but this grazing also helps with tillering the western wheatgrass and then breaking up that clay crust so that we get some infill from other species. We've been using the razor grazer that PCF gave us, thank you very much, for keeping them out of the wet areas. And we have another new wet area I'll show you a bit later. And then the other adaptive management strategy that we're doing is additional broadcast seedings. So PCF's given us, or ACA or Multistar, I'm not sure who has given us some seed over the years. So we've had some fringe sage, and that was really the most successful diversity adding species. Like, it's super tiny seed, and so it can just land on the surface and you can just hand broadcast it, and we now have really quite a nice cover of fringe sage. Purple prairie clover, similarly, we scarified it before we spread it, and it did not too badly, but it's quite palatable, so a lot of things like to eat it, and there's some cover of purple prairie clover, but not a lot. Silver sage, ACA's given us some bags of silver sagebrush seed over the years, and we had heard that you could broadcast it on snow and it would take, but we had almost no luck with that. We've got about 12 plants on 90 acres. So, and the other thing that really didn't work out that well was wild harvesting. Some stuff was wild harvested on the silver sage properties, ACA's properties further east, but I haven't seen much come up from that. A few plants of like rocky ground sandwort, which we don't get in our area, but it's definitely common in the Cypress Hills. So I'm sure that it has come from that wild harvested mixture, but I think as a sort of cost benefit, it really wasn't very effective. I think if you're going to do that, you really need to be able to broadcast it and harrow it in. whereas we had enough of a cover of vegetation that we didn't want to start harrowing it and kind of ripping up what we had to try and add more. And then natural infill. So the wind-blown seed will come in naturally with prairie on 3 sides. We've got quite a bit of infill, mostly from the aster family, the wind-blown seed. Hairy golden aster would be the most common one. And then all those other little species in there. Not in great numbers, but except for the hairy golden aster, but still, it helps. But then we're also getting a lot of invasive natural infill. So the brooms are still there, but Canada bluegrass is really spreading, and I think there's so much bare soil that it's just having a heyday. Kentucky bluegrass is starting to spread. Crested wheatgrass, some, not a heck of a lot actually. Black medic. I talked about sweet clover. And then there were some seed mix contaminants. I'm not too worried about smooth brome. It's really dry and uplandy, so it's not really spreading. It's more just like little patches. There is some sheep fescue though, which I keep trying to get when we're moving around the fields there. So now, last year was year 12. So on the coarse till, there's blue grama, 20%, western wheatgrass 2. We still have a lot of bare ground and a lot of just litter with not a lot of, green vegetation on it. Alfalfa is really a bit of a pain now in this field. The tall grasses are still reduced as far as range health goes. The ground cover is absent, and the litter is really just sort of blue grama basis, so there's not a lot of volume to it. It's just like thin cover. On the finer textured soils, the western wheatgrass does better. There's quite a bit less bare ground. There's still that little annual grass signature, but not, compared to what it was, I feel like we're just gonna have to live with it. There's quite a lot in that area. As long as it doesn't start getting worse, I feel like we're winning. And then the wet meadow, it really surprises me that there isn't much western wheatgrass in this kind of Lysol area, but there isn't. And the Canada bluegrass loves it, and there's quite a bit of bare ground. But this is also where we're seeing that plant that it just came off the rare list last June, this yellow evening primrose, and this year there were thousands of them. So there's our challenge. There's still quite a lot of sweet clover, and the dark green blobs are the alfalfa. We do have tame pasture to the north, so with the wind speeds in southern Alberta, I'm sure it gets all over the place. But this field has really suffered with the drought. So this is 2021. So once again, it's from the beginning of April to the end of September, this chart. And the accumulated moisture is the red line. The long-term average moisture is the yellow line. So we're about 50%, and that's for like the second year in a row at least. And then the blue line is average temperature, long-term average temperature, and the green, which is not the greatest to see, was the fluctuations in 2021. So we had the heat dome early in June, and then we had drought right into July and August. But when that blue grama starts to grow in June, it's a warm season grass, and it really it killed a lot of blue grama, and unfortunately, that is the dominant species on this field. So now there's a bit of an issue, like in this photograph. So there's some paler areas where there's a little bit of blue grama, but I was quite surprised. There's some I'd say probably 20% of the field, of the blue grama in the field just croaked, and a lot of it was just set back. So resilience to climate events was reduced. It's not there. The diversity there, I think, is not enough to provide the resilience that's needed to give it some protection from climate change or climate events. So in my mind, we need to overseed this to increase diversity and resilience. So I would just seed into this sod with, and those are the species that I would like to add. And there's a couple of grants I'm planning to apply for, because honestly, these these are challenging for individuals to take on by themselves, and without the support of like ACA and PCF all these years, this wouldn't be in the state it's in. We put in a lot of in-kind labor, but it does take a team to make these kinds of things happen.
When you oversee change, you still would have to harrow it.
No,
No?
there's machinery like a hay buster, like which will just drill into, it'll just lay seed into an existing turf. So that's the kind of thing that you don't want to lose. You don't want to lose what we got. You know, there's lots of good things going on in the field, but I just think over the long term, it's not where it needs to be. But then stepping back from just looking at the plants, like the overall objectives of that restoration plan, regaining ecological function, yes, there's definitely been an improvement. Establishing that similar plant community, we're not there yet. Improving the health, absolutely. Maintaining a travel corridor, yes, definitely. We see all kinds of wildlife moving through this area. These are some of the species that we've seen on the property. So plain spadefoot, there's at least 2 areas where we've seen them. We've actually seen them on the doorstep in rain sometimes. Long-billed curlew, Sprague's pipit, rattlesnakes, they come up every summer from the river valley, badgers all the time. And we've had pronghorn have their young in the field. So on other fronts, it is definitely an improvement. And then this is just a snapshot of bird use of the reseeded field. This is a survey that ACA does. I never know whether it's like ACA or multi-SAR, so if I'm saying it wrong. So this is just a survey they do on one day in June or early July every year. And each color represents a different species of bird. So the year it was seeded is the left-hand column, and it's mostly hornblacks and American crow. And over time, you can see that the numbers of species of birds using that area are increasing. There's been a decline recently, but I don't think that is solely on this property. There have been declines in birds in the dry mixed grass and drought. So an improvement. And we're still poking away at projects to improve diversity. So one of the things Bonnie did is she wanted to have a pond for spadefoots, or I can't remember, she had a few species in mind, and it was just an excavation. So last year, with some funding from the Green Acreages program, Ken finished that off and lined that pond with about 10 to 15 centimeters of clay from nearby verdigris coulee, and it's holding water. It's like there's even deeper now, and it's just meant to be a shallow Atlantic wetland. It's not supposed to be like a swimming pool. It's supposed to be habitat for species in the area. And now I'm growing sagebrush plugs rather than trying to use seed. It's a lot more effective, and then I'm just playing with different mitigations to get them to live through that first year. And it's doing pretty well, actually. I've tried other species, but they get eaten almost immediately. I've tried needle and thread, buffalo bean, which I would love to get growing. You know, the light seeded species move in, the heavy seeded species don't. So if we could get them in there another way, great. So I thought, well, let's grow seedlings, but the needle and thread, the buffalo bean, and the blazing star get eaten by either rodents or antelope within like 2 weeks of planting. But apparently nobody likes the taste of sagebrush, so it's doing quite well.
When you say shallow, how deep is shallow?
What?
Pond.
Oh, probably in the middle, probably not deeper than this, but most of that is very shallow. No diving boards.
Just for frogs.
Yeah. So obstacles to restoration, edge effects, invasives, site history, lack of suitable seed, drought, and then, you know, money and time to keep on with adaptive management.
I wonder, Jamie, if it's the, you know, as you started from the beginning, the loss of the topsoil, which is the perhaps the biggest impediment. Just starting with the kind of cycle we got after cultivation.
You know, when I think about, you know, like when you're trying to reclaim fescue grassland, less soil is better.
Yeah.
So it does make it drier though. And then you've got that clay component to it as well. But I don't know, native grasses are pretty tough. You don't need a lot of soil. Yeah. But you know, if those species aren't there in the first place, it's a long way to blow in from an edge, you know, compared to something small like a well site or a pipeline like a huge field is a different animal when it comes to thinking about natural infill.
This is incredibly tough project. It's so complex. It's not the big complex.
It's interesting. It's sort of, you know, it's one of those things I just can't let go of. So anyway, it's a good thing I'm like that. But so lessons that we've learned, seed a diverse mix. And we know this from, you know, ACA's done more, but this was their second project. So they definitely seed more diverse mixes now. And we know that from research from Jay Lusari and Tech Alberta. And you're better off to seed more species. And I would say keep adding to it. There's no walk away solutions. Ongoing adaptive management's really required. And I've given this talk to more sort of industry audiences. And, you know, that really is getting a problem getting people to stay on it once they've reclaimed it. You can't just walk away. And then building land use into your long-term plan. You know, you can't just leave a piece of land, put a fence around it. Like you have to incorporate grazing. And then site history will haunt you, and don't expect perfect. Which is actually one of the most comforting things. It was Chris Helzer said that at a reclamation conference not long ago.
What about incorporating fire?
Pardon me?
Fire.
I would love to burn it. I'm not sure what my neighbors would think. I think that is the problem. I would love to burn it out. It's a good thing my husband's not here because he.
Probably is those little spot fires can soon become a couple of townships, you know.
I would love to do that. I think that's really
Yeah.
or maybe get Rennie Grills. I'd love to get a professional crew out there and burn it. But at the moment, I'm not sure that what it needs right away, but definitely, I think fire in the mix is a good. I could give a whole other talk about the crested wheatgrass field we've converted. I think fire would be good there right now. So anyway, these projects.
Last summer, and there's actually a NGO out of Saskatchewan.
Yeah, Rennie Grills.
They're probably sorry, but they do the prescribers and prepare for them. Make sure that the spot fire doesn't turn into.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know if a fire would carry in that north field because there's so much bare ground. But in general, I like the idea of fire. But, you know, once again, as individuals, like, how would we do that? You know, we'd have to have insurance, and I don't know of anyone in our area that actually burns. But anyway. Sometimes there are. There was in November.
Strip up against later on. Smaller streets.
Yeah. Sometimes burns a little bit at night when you don't see the smoke, but.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is my last slide. So as I mentioned, these kinds of projects are difficult for individuals, so it really takes these kinds of partnerships to pull them off. And I really want to thank PCF and ACA for your support, and also for the just sort of vision of these groups for trying to defragment native grass